Welcome to another Practical Wealth Show. And so let me tell you what this is about, and then I'm going to introduce our guest. So what we're going to talk about today is how to protect your business, your family, before you lose it. So we're going to talk about trusts, LLCs, lawsuits, divorce, and the asset protection. We're going to talk about moves most business owners miss. So my guest today is I'm joined today by Mark Price. He's a trust and LLC attorney with more than 42 years of experience in asset protection, complex tax planning, and estate preservation strategies. Mark is the founding attorney of Wyoming Trust Attorney, where he helps families and business owners and high net worth individuals structure their wealth so it's better protected from creditors, lawsuits, divorce, and other threats. What makes Mark especially interesting, is that he's been on both sides of the table. In his career, he served as a bankruptcy trustee, where his job was to attack weak structures and recover assets for creditors. And today he uses that experience to help people build protection that is designed to hold up the pressure. So this conversation is not just about trust. It's not just about theory. We're going to talk about what actually works, what fails, and is it too late to protect yourself, and why the business owners and families need to think about wealth protection before there is a problem. That's a mouthful, but Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Curtis. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
My pleasure. So tell me why this matters. So most people focus on making money, investing money, and maybe reducing taxes, which is what I get all the time. But they rarely ask, can someone take all this away from me? That's where I want to go today. And so tell them a little about your journey that you could tell them better than me yammering on, and then let's get into that.
I'd love to. Thank you. I started out, my family's been in small business for a couple centuries. So I've been through the ups and downs in my lifetime as well. My family originally came out to the Western United States from Connecticut and Ohio, drilling oil wells back in the late 1880s, early 1900s.
Okay.
You've seen the boom to the bust of the economy. And, my grandfather used to say there's only one thing they can't take away from you, and that's your education. So it's important to get a good education, and not just book learning, but also to diversify your experiences in life.
Yes.
And, at the end of the day, one of the tenets that I see within your podcast is it is what you make, but it's also what you keep. And that's what you really got to begin focusing on, because given the ups and downs that we've seen over the last 40 years, and I think that, we're kind of in a manic state right now politically and on the market and whatnot. What goes down in a crash quick, right? And, you can lose everything very quickly. So the question is, how do you preserve it? And the best way to preserve it is get a good legacy planning attorney and put the structure in place so that when it does happen, when there is a crash and where there are financial issues, that you are able to protect your assets from the strongest position possible. And that position is going to be a domestic asset protection trust. And they're structured to provide for the preservation of family wealth.
So now before we started recording, you started going to a story just about that. Let's tell that story.
Yeah. I represented a client about 7 or 8 years ago, and he was very successful in his practice. And he had accumulated a lot of wealth, but it was strung all over the place. So we put it all together and put it into an asset protection trust for the benefit of the entirety of his family. He had a wife and 3 adult children. They all signed off on the agreement. And, a trust is nothing more than a contract that says we're going to put these things held in trust. And there's a trustee and independent trustee administered. We can get to that in a bit. Right. So they did this about 7 years ago. About 6 months ago, she decided she wanted out of the relationship, which is, from a personal standpoint, there's nothing worse than a bad marriage. And I advocate people getting out of a marriage quickly if they need to as well. Mm-hmm. But it also has to be, from my standpoint, it has to be economically, financially, the least detrimental to the family at the same time. Yeah. So she engaged a group of attorneys out of this particular group. Family was from New Jersey, but they established a Wyoming Trust. We domiciled all the trust assets in Wyoming, with the exception of some real estate, which you can't move real estate. And she engaged some, very high-powered domestic relations attorneys and came after it, wanted her half of the estate. And New Jersey doesn't necessarily recognize asset protection trusts from the standpoint of the preservation of creditor claims, at least insofar as assets in New Jersey are concerned, but it's Wyoming law that governs. They came into the divorce court. The court looked, and the judge looked at that and said, "What? She entered into this contract knowing what she was doing. That estate's preserved. It's going to be managed in accordance with what the trustee says, and she gets the distribution she gets. She can't break that trust up." So she wasn't able to come in and break that apart during the marriage. So I've always said that these trusts, irrespective of where you live, are the most beneficial prenuptial agreement that you can get in a marital relationship. So this involved $25 million.
Wow. When is this? So I had another question, but now I want to piggyback on one. So what's the difference? This is what people are thinking. So, because they'll hear, I always tell people, that's why I like doing long form interviews. You can't let TikTok be your 60 seconds on a source. What's the difference between this and, like we'll talk to our clients about a revocable living trust, but this seems to be a little bit more detailed. And when should a family or think about this? Like, what level should they be at for this before it becomes applicable?
Right. A revocable living trust is just something that two people enter into together. They can get rid of it any time.
Right.
Because you can get rid of it at any time. The creditors don't have to acknowledge the existence of it either. So the creditors can go directly into the trust. Mm-hmm. So it's good. It's an estate planning mechanism. I advocate it for people who are worth under $1 million. But okay, if you have a business, or if you have a high liability type of practice like an attorney or a dentist or a doctor, you should have an asset protection trust, because that keeps creditors out and it keeps the estate for the benefit of the family. So what you do is that as you make money, you transfer these monies into the trust and you start additional businesses or rental real estate, that sort of thing. You put it over in this asset protection trust. If something happens where you get sued, and most doctors always just relied on the policies that came out of the hospitals they were working with or the practice groups they were working with. But you're seeing more and more attorneys are going beyond the policy limits, and the malpractice is getting more and more expensive and difficult to obtain.
Yeah. So
you're seeing, and I had a guy of the Southwestern United States who was working with an individual who was assisting his practice, who sexually assaulted one of the women in the practice. So they came back and they sued the doctor for insufficient oversight and the practice itself. And that wasn't covered by malpractice, because it had nothing to do with the practice of medicine. It had everything to do with, I don't know what it had to do with, but it didn't have to do with that. So they came back in. So the answer was, at that point, they could take everything that was in that practice and apply it to whatever judgment was obtained. Well, if you have your movable objects, your cash, your stock accounts, your rental real estate, all that into an asset protection trust, it's separate and apart from that practice. And as a result of that, it's outside the claims of that practice.
All right. So now, because see, this is where Mark's been on the other side of this, trying to pierce that stuff, that corporate veil. So you've been on the side of attacking business, recover assets. What are the, I want to delve deep into that, but what are some of the, just off the top, common mistakes that you see people fail in asset protection? Is there more than what you just stated? Is it a little bit deeper you want to go?
Yeah, the easiest thing to get to is you look at where's the money coming from and what does it go towards. So if you've got an asset protection trust and you're treating it like your back pocket and you just pull it out and use it as a wallet anytime you need it for personal expenses, then you don't respect the existence of the trust, and neither will the court.
Okay.
So that's the biggest single thing. The other thing is, and we were just talking about earlier, when you're dealing with management service organizations in the context of medical, dentist practice, that sort of thing, you don't keep IRS regs, you don't get your annual audit done, and you're not playing by the rules. So if you're not playing by the rules that the IRS has, why would the creditors be charged with the responsibility of playing by the rules? And that's when they can break into these trusts. So what I see is a failure to keep up with things. Now, in fairness, if you're a doctor or if you're a high-powered dentist, these sorts of things with multi-office practices, when do you have time to deal with the administrative aspects of your business? Very seldom. So you better hire somebody that can do it and that will do it. And then you better just write them a check every year and be happy about it. So that's the biggest advice. And typically what happens is people fall apart in the money management. They fall apart about the upkeep of them.
Okay. Let's talk about, well, no, let me go back. What counts as too late? Okay. Is it when you get sued, when you get a demand letter? When there's a credit issue? Like where is it, I got a problem and it's too late to deal with this?
Yeah. Well, the ideal thing would be the day that you get out of med school or law school or whatever, put your trust into place right then. But, at that point, you're not thinking about it. So when you start making some money, get your trust going. If you wait until you're 50, 60 years old and you have a massive liability claim, and then you come in to get the trust, you're probably a little too late in the process. But here's what I tell people is that, look, you've been hit with a lawsuit. Get the trust now, put the assets in trust, and acknowledge that insofar as this lawsuit's concerned, those assets that you put into trust probably can be taken back out to satisfy that claim. But any subsequently arising claims, no, it can't. So it's never too late, but you do have some potential liability in the trust if that's an existing claim already. Now, here's the thing around it. In Wyoming, what we do is we deal with movable objects versus immovable objects or assets. If you're sitting in a place like you've got a stock account that you put into a particular type of trust and you domicile it in Wyoming, that judge has no jurisdiction over those immovable assets, out of the control of that judge. Now, if you have residential real estate in New Jersey that you transfer into an LLC that a Wyoming LLC maintains, you've got what they call a statute of limitations that you have to get a certain number of years beyond it before it'll be recognized. So you need to play by those rules. But in Wyoming, you have a 4-month statute of limitations on the transfer of movable assets. So why would you not put your cash, your stock accounts, your LLC membership interest into that asset protection trust, comply with the Fraudulent Transfer Act conveyance notices, and get beyond that 4-month period? 4 months is nothing.
Right. So let me ask you this. So, because we've had people do this, they've set up they've got some assets, but revocable living trust already. So they already have it. They've already moved. They've already funded it to a certain extent. When does this come in? And, well, I guess over $1 million, but then can they move from one to another, or can they have layers of this? Like, how would that work? Am I thinking about this right? Just, you could correct me if I'm.
No, I think, I think this is a great way to start. But when you get to a certain asset level, you need to get the asset protection trust. So you transfer it from the revocable living trust into the asset protection trust, and you keep the objects that you can't get asset protection trust, like your home and that sort of thing, you keep those in your revocable living trust for estate planning purposes. So the two can run in tandem.
Because they're two different things. One is for asset protection, because people think a regular trust helps them with asset protection, and in my understanding, it's more of a estate planning tool.
That's it.
Doesn't it save you? People think it saves them money in taxes. Oh, I'm gonna get my business, I'm gonna put it in a trust, I'm not gonna pay taxes. I mean, you hear the stuff I hear, and I gotta unwind this fiction they're hearing on TikTok.
Well, if you think you're gonna get away paying no taxes, then don't complain about the potholes in the road.
Right. And what about trust? The difference between trusts versus LLCs versus insurance. So for a business owner, what is the difference between what does an LLC protect? What does insurance protect? And what does the trust that we're speaking about protect?
Well, we use LLCs as an underlying part of the umbrella of the trust. The trust provides an asset protection umbrella that you have businesses and stock accounts and cash accounts and other intangible objects in LLCs. That LLC, basically, if you're using a Wyoming LLC, says that it's a single member LLC owned by probably a holding company owned by the trust.
Okay.
And whatever goes on in that LLC doesn't spill over into any other LLC. So if you have an active business and somebody gets hurt in that business and they sue that LLC, the assets in that LLC can go to pay off that claim. But underneath that trust statute, underneath the trust umbrella, you cannot get other LLCs or the trust themselves in the payment of the claims on that LLC, but you can take that one LLC. Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing to remember is that once you begin making excess profits in that LLC, you transfer it up to the trust. And then once you transfer it up to that trust, these people can't get after those excess profits. So that's how you end up, as you make more money. It's like real estate. 10 to 15 years into the real estate, you're generating a lot of cash out of that real estate.
Yes.
So you're taking the money, you're flushing it up to the trust is flushing it down to other LLCs and buying more real estate. So the real estate that becomes more and more, develops more and more equity into it, you don't want to leave that at risk for the ones that are not that high in equity. So you divide them out, you put them into different LLC structures.
So this is for asset, so with the living trust, we'll fund it and we'll make the trust, the life insurance, the trust, the beneficiary of the life insurance proceeds. That's one thing, but this is different. We're talking about not wealth transfer or estate. We're talking about asset protection, which are two, that's how they can live together.
Yes.
So the other question on the insurance is one of the things that, because I'm saying stuff I say, I don't know if you should correct me, because my wife's an attorney. Stay in your lane. So,
good advice.
So I said, look, your first line. We teach a concept called maximum protection. So we call it. This is where this fits in my principle. I teach like something called principles based. So our second principle is maximum protection. So we look at the insurance, the trust, and I start with insurance. Like I've the first line of defense is liability coverage. Is that an accurate statement? Okay.
Absolutely. And you deal with a lot of umbrella policies in the real estate structure.
Yes. And so I don't do them, but I like to do it. I think certain things are specialty. So I just say, hey, here, I'm going to get you a guy or call your guy and say this, right? And have them do it, especially have a good relationship. I'm not trying to take business from people.
Exactly.
And so, because they all work together, it's like planning. And how often should they? So you talked about the reporting. How often should they be looking at this? Is it every year? Are they going to get a letter? Is it, how does that work?
Well, you're selling the insurance, and you know what the risks and the liabilities are. You need to meet with those clients. If they have a major life-changing event, they need to call you. Yeah. And at the end of every year, you should have a follow-up call with people. And it may only take 5 minutes, or it may take a couple of hours. But let's go over where you are and what your liabilities are. And you're exactly right. From the standpoint of liability at the LLC level for real estate, those umbrella policies are going to be good most of the time. But what happens if they're not? Right. Then you need that excess planning that goes into it. And so that excess planning are for the unforeseen types of liabilities that you have. And, like children get divorced. You want to make sure that your child's a part of your trust, but that child, when that child gets married, that new spouse coming in, if they get divorced, doesn't have a part of that trust. You maintain the family assets for the family. I
have this joke ago. I protect my daughter's future first ex-husband. Right? So.
I don't know. I'm always to see somebody that has a first marriage at a young age that lasts.
Right.
Like, wow, congratulations. That's fantastic, because people's don't. And I had a client, probably about 5 years ago now, that his son had gotten married, and this was before he got into an asset protection trust. His son had gotten married, and he ended up transferring a portion of his son's inheritance to this young lady. Mm-hmm. And we wrapped everything up into a trust. She just retained her interest in that LLC. When they got divorced, they had to buy her out for $2.5 million. Ouch. And they've been married less than 2 years.
Oh, yeah.
And he says, well, how do I avoid that? I said, you can't avoid that. But moving forward, we can put everybody into a common pile, which we did. 5 years later, I get a call from him. He says, oh, my goodness. He said, you can't believe it. I've been married to my wife for 35 years. She's been cheating on me for 34.
Wow.
And now she wants to take a section out of this trust and with her lover just disappear over the horizon. And I said, well, that's great, but she can't. She has an asset protection trust. She signed a contract. She's in it. He says, well, what do I do? I said, well, get a good divorce attorney, get a good litigation attorney. And let's set this thing up. They'll be testifying. We'll set it up. We'll see what we do. He had about $25 million in that trust. He settled for $2.5 million with her.
There you go.
Would you consider that a win?
That's $2 million too much, but yeah, that's out of 25
million. That's a win. That's a win. But he was still angry, and I said, "Get over your ego. That's a good deal."
Yeah, Yeah. So
And
where do people get a false sense of security? So for example, they think I'm going to cover this. I just wanted to make sure I flesh it out a little more. LLC, so I'm protected. Things like that. Where is that thinking incomplete?
well, I think you're exactly right. When you get into insurance, that helps a lot of people get sued over the limits, though. And I know in that one particular malpractice I was looking at, they were suing over the limits, and the malpractice coverage said, "Hey, we're going to malpractice, and you're on it for the rest of it. Good luck finding an attorney." So that's a very real risk these days. And I think correct me if I'm wrong. Aren't you particularly seeing that in the insurance industry where these attorneys are going beyond those insurance caps?
Yeah, well, I haven't seen it, but I've heard, like, fortunately that hasn't happened to any of the clients that I work with yet. No, you're not put the yet on, but
Yeah.
but what did I hear? It's two types of business: those that have been sued or will be sued, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you gotta play. I try to position our practice as really defensive coordinator. Like,
Mhm.
so I don't give investment advice. I'm not trying to do that. I want you to make sure that you protect what you have, that we build, I call it a moat around your castle. So you're helping me build their moat, like
Mhm.
Game of Thrones, right? And so, do you have a moat? But because it could be frivolous, but you have insurance, right? And the insurance company would rather pay than take it to trial. So it doesn't matter because it would cost like $40 or $50 to file a lawsuit. So
Yeah.
it's for what they should do, but politicians don't want to do it, is they should make the people pay if they lose because it's frivolous. But nobody wants to reform tort law. So
You're preaching to the choir, man.
yeah.
I
So
agree.
yeah.
And if you lose, well, there's nothing but upside.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Well, there you
Exactly.
go.
So let's talk about Wyoming advantage, because I hear different things about that. So as we record this, I'm in PA. You talked about New Jersey. And you talk about the importance of where the trust lives. Why does the state matter if the client doesn't live in Wyoming?
Well, because the statutory construct of the state controls what goes on with that trust. So if you have a Wyoming trust that's domiciled in Wyoming with Wyoming assets, a Wyoming court will determine what goes on within that trust.
Okay.
And there's a very specific case. And, I'm talking about the movable assets. Okay. If you've got a residence in Pennsylvania law is going to apply. You can't say, "Oh, Judge, we're going to litigate this Pennsylvania real estate in Wyoming." And you get this kind of incredulous look, the judge looking over his glasses going, "We're going to do that here." Yeah. At the end of the day, it's going to be here. But what Wyoming allows you to do is you establish a trust under a contract with a trustee who's domiciled in Wyoming that you control through statutory mechanisms. It's a creature of statute. You put your movable assets into that trust. So your cash, your stock, your life insurance policy, all that stuff goes into that. Now, if somebody wants to come and try to take those assets, they're more than welcome to give it a shot. Here's what's happened. There's a specific case out of California that deals with this. It's called Cleopatra. And this young woman was a beneficiary of a huge trust. Her father was an oil and gas guy, huge trust. She got married. She had kids with this guy. This guy divorces her. The guy ends up with the kids. She gets hit with child support orders. And he becomes kind of abusive with the orders. So what she does is she takes that trust and she moves it to South Dakota. So fair enough, there was a canning provision that allowed her to do that, or allowed her trustee to do that. So they end up in South Dakota litigating child support orders against this trust. South Dakota says, look, the United States Constitution says we have to give full faith and credit to a judgment from another state. So they did. We give full faith and credit to it. However, and this is based on U.S. law under the Constitution, the actual things that you're able to get as a result of that judgment, the non-exempt assets that can be used to satisfy that judgment, are determined by South Dakota law, and South Dakota law does not recognize child support claims.
Interesting. Okay.
Boom. End of the case like that. So it's Curtis, I call it the interim effect. And we were hit with this a couple of years ago in Denver during the COVID crisis.
Mm-hmm.
A guy came in and he had some fairly substantial real estate, and he had backed this entrepreneur in the restaurant business who was just had been brilliant at starting and running restaurants, very successful with it. COVID hit, everybody's out of business. Well, they ended up taking a very large loss as a result of this, and this guy had guaranteed what he had done. The problem was you couldn't find any assets in his name. So we said, there's undoubtedly a trust or a series of trusts with this person, and you could probably get into those trusts or sue those trusts, at least get them to court, but you may or may not get a recovery from it. And we said, at the end of the day, you end up probably spending at least half as much or as much money trying to get the money as the money you're going to get. And he said, well, it's not worth it then, because it's going to take me 4 to 5 years to do it as well. So it's a real drain on my time. And then when we got done, he said, well, how do I get some of those trusts?
Right.
This is the inter-arum effect. When you see it and you see what the effects are. And Wyoming has what they call a chancery court. It's staffed by judges and attorneys who know what the law is in this particular area. And they have it within their ambit that they want to finish these cases within 6 to 9 months. And they know what the relative issues are on these things, and they put the attorney's feet to the fire and they get it done. Now, you're not going to find any reporting coming out of the chancery court, because all of those lawsuits are they're sealed to get in and be able to look at those lawsuits. So, but I can tell you, having litigated a couple of cases there, it's not going to go very well for a claimant if the trust is structured correctly and run correctly.
Let me ask you, so as I'm hearing this, I'm thinking, I know there's two sides of, entities, the trust. There's the accounting and tax, and there's the asset protection side, right? So as I think about a business owner I work with, let's say he's got a business, he's got revenue, he's got, let's say an S Corp or say S Corp, because it's pass through to his personal. He's got to file state income tax. And his LLC is set up in PA or in New Jersey. And I'm hearing this, and I don't think I have this type of protection. What should I do? What can I do, Mark, if I'm that person?
Right. I can give you some very specific examples. Now, many times, I kind of view S corporations as being an historical anachronism. I prefer to use LLCs that pass throughs to the trust. But you have to have a particular mechanism in place with the trust. You can do it.
Okay.
But you take a look and you say, okay, where's the money being generated, Curtis? If it's being generated in a stock account that's domiciled in Wyoming, you do not owe a state tax in Pennsylvania. I don't know what the state taxes are there, or New Jersey. You don't owe it, because the party that's incurring the liability and generating the revenues lives in Wyoming. New Jersey can't go to Wyoming and say you owe us a state tax. It's not going to happen.
So let's say they've been in business 5 years. They could rearrange that. You could help them rearrange that.
Yes, you can. And so if you've got a home-based business,
yep,
or you have a business that pays booking commissions or could pay booking commission, I'll give you a specific example. A very successive doctor off of the East Coast says, my God, this state taxes are just killing me. I'm paying a booking commission over here, but they're getting taxed again. So he moved the booking agency out to Wyoming, domiciled it there, populated it there, and paid the booking commissions out to that. Well, on about, what do you have? He said about $1.5 million in booking commissions at a 14% rate. So that first we saved.
All right. Now we're talking
money, right?
That's right.
Money at the end of the day. Why would you not do that?
And so since you moved it, the state that the original LLC has been sent up, you've kind of transferred it to this. So you still have to pay federal, but there's no state tax due on that if you're in a state that the income tax.
That's exactly it. So you would wrap that business up in whatever East Coast state that's in. You would enter into a contract with a new business in Wyoming that's populated there, and you would run the money into that business.
Okay. Let me follow up on it. How do divorce, in-laws, adult children, business unclear ownership create risk inside a family business?
Oh my goodness. Well, if you're not an asset protection trust, the sky's the limit. The divorce court, the judge can come up with what's fair and equitable. What's the fair and equitable distribution of the assets out of that marital estate? Everybody's view, doesn't it? But you get the attorneys involved in 3 or 4 years of nasty litigation, several $100,000, you got something that no one can live with. That's your biggest risk, it seems to me, is the divorce. Have you been through divorces? Any divorces?
No.
Oh, but you've seen your friends do it.
Oh yeah, well, wife's an attorney. She did it all the time, and we're this month we had our 28th wedding anniversary.
Oh, well, congratulations.
So no, we don't. That part.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. But that's
yeah.
the big single risk that most families have, isn't it? And I just gave you the example between him and his wife who got divorced and the trust control.
Yeah.
And then the one where the family had given money or given some LLC interest to this kid and his wife, and then she divorced in 2 years, and what the effect of that was. So I think my own view is that divorce is probably the biggest single thing out there that you've got to be protective against.
Yeah, and I won't even get started. I've had meetings where I remember I was thinking of a friend of mine I used to play basketball with, and with the clients' houses. So he brought me over so they could argue through me. Right. So they were on one side of the table, and it's like, well, you don't do this and she don't do this. It's like after about 10 minutes, like, listen, can I leave? Y'all don't need me. I don't need to. What am I? I'm not an intermediary. We're not getting anything done here. And so, yeah, but it's funny. I think I was getting married around that time, and we were going through counseling. And then it was obvious to me that y'all didn't, because there was a lot of, that my pastor was asking us that, okay, y'all ain't talk about none of this stuff, that I was going through. So that's interesting. So let me ask you. So a lot of wealth gets lost not because the market crashed, but because the family structure was never clarified. Is that a accurate statement? And this is kind of what you're helping do with.
Yeah, when you talk about legacy planning, you have to be really clear-eyed about what your children are capable of doing, the direction and control that they'll need. And I've always looked for, if you can find it, what I call a Dutch uncle in your family who can give you bad news, but you still respect it.
Okay.
Right? The one who can sit there and said, I've known you for 50 years and your dad's died. Now I'm 75, I'm moving on, but I'm going to tell you, you can't run this business. Here's what I'm going to do, and here's what I'm going to put into place. If you're lucky enough to have someone like that, that's great. Otherwise, you have to do it.
Right.
You have to be in a position in your trust documents when you say, okay, at the end of the day, when these things happen, this takes charge and control. And you have to sit down, shut up, and listen. And what you put into the trust is you put no contest provisions, so that if you come in and you sue the trust or you seek accountings under the trust that you can't do or whatnot, you forfeit your interest and the interest of your children as if you died without kids. That's where you are with that. And it gets rid of all those internal strife issues, because you lose it, like we were just talking about earlier, the loser loses.
Right.
You lose this thing, you lose it completely. And you say, well, what about good faith claims? Well, good faith is something that depends on who the person asserting it is. And so within a family, my goal is to, sit down and get this thing resolved with somebody who can help you through it, and get on to the other side and take your wounds and your losses and, find out a way to reconcile with the family and move on. Because if you can't, we're going to kick out of the family. And you're allowed to do that within these trust mechanisms, because some kids you just can't deal with.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the wealth, I think you call it the wealth protection table. Who should be sitting at that table before someone implements a trust or LLC structure, all the stuff that we're talking about?
Yeah, it's a pastor's always a good place to start.
Okay.
If you're active within your church and that person knows who you are, that's a really fine place to start. You better have your Dom Rel attorney there, and you also better have your CPA there, and a good one. My view is, I have people saying, do you have a good CPA? Yes. Well, how much do they charge? Well, apparently you can't afford it because you just asked. They are worth their weight in gold, and I've never seen one that overcharged. So, that's what you need to do. And you need to sit down, with your spouse or with the rest of your family and have a heart to heart, because you're in your 50s now. I'm supposing you see things a lot differently than you did in your 30s.
Yes.
Yeah. Bring your wife into the room, who's been working with Dom Rel issues now for 20 years. Her perspective would be invaluable. So you take what you got and you sit down with the family. You may have some family friends that you could bring in who have known you generationally for a while and can help you with this stuff, putting it together.
I like that. So what we teach something called principles-based planning. So I act as kind of say a contractor where we're put, all right, here's a good attorney, here's a to that, and then I put it all in one document. So the idea is that all of your people should be talking together, right? And helping them select good people. I might leave that to you, but the both of us to sort out who's in the family. But I think that that's critical. I don't know. I was just doing a show and I was working on my book, and I was about legacy, part of it, and a lot of people just don't have a plan. Because I always talk about the fourth principle that we talk about is a legacy of wealth and the wisdom to go along with the wealth. And I've had people get money from insurance contracts but they don't take instruction. All of a sudden, $1 million is gone in 3.5 years. That kind of stuff. So that's where to me, the wealth protection table concept is huge.
Yeah. But what are you protecting? You're not protecting the wealth. You're protecting the well-being. If you don't identify with the money, right? The money's an intangible object. You hold it up. It says, why is this worth something? Because the government says it is and we accept it. That doesn't mean the money has value. The thing that has value is right here. And that's why when you bring these people to the table, to start out with a dinner party, what are you doing? You're building your community. You're building your legacy community. And you're introducing your kids generationally to the people who can help.
Right. I mean, I find, if you find it's like they're good professionals. What they operate in little silos, like little, this is my world. And they, a lot of times it's what I call collateral damage because people tend to operate in these silos and nobody's talking to each other. Do you have a remedy for that or
Well, as I say, when you're talking about these things, they're physically at the table talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a big difference. And nothing supplants tactile communication, right? Being next to somebody, shaking their hand, having a drink, having a meal with them, and introducing them to other people that way. It breaks down all the barriers at that point and makes life so much easier in the conversation. And then you're talking about something other than what's really at the issue there, but you're developing a relationship.
You just gave me an idea. I got to write that down. That could be something we could add on how to build your advisor world. And get everybody working together. Let's talk about red flags that are out there, vetting advisors, and then I want you to tell them about. But how should someone, they hear this, or they're hearing stuff and they hear our show, how should they begin to vet asset protection or trust attorney? What questions should they ask before hiring one?
Oh gosh, go into their experience. You've taken a look at my resume. Mm-hmm. I've litigated in the tax court, litigated in the bankruptcy court. I've been doing this for 40 some years. And I come from a CPA background. I'm a statistician. I'm an attorney, all those things. I look at the organizations that we've done. And I'm a serial entrepreneur with these things, so I would say that's a good place to start because on my website, I said, I deal with that exactly what you should be looking at.
Right.
And I always look at, and I run into these kids that are like 10, 15 years into this. I said, well, okay, how many tax court cases have you litigated and under what issues? And if that goes over their head and they haven't done any, it's like, well, you didn't put in the hard work. You got to the most lucrative aspect of the practice without paying the dues to get there. And the other thing, it's like, remember Bernie Madoff?
Yes.
If it sounds too good to be true, guess what? It's too good to be true.
True. That's right.
Yeah. What makes you so special? You walk on water, you somehow are at this elevated status and you're going to get this benefit that nobody else is getting. Get a reality with you.
Can they get... That then brings to a question. So what are red flags that if they're hearing something or they're in the midst of this and they have more of a product than a real strategy? What are some red flags you see that they might run into that they might want to pause?
You're saying if they have more of a product than a strategy?
How do they know if they're getting more of a product pitch instead of a strategy?
No, exactly right. Look at the layout. Right? What's being laid out in front of you? Let me look at the diagram that you've got and what it accomplishes and what you can add on beyond that. Okay. So what we do is that we put together an asset protection trust and then an umbrella underneath it. And we put that together, and then we work with you in dealing with those LLCs and those businesses and whatnot that are underneath that umbrella. And if need be, we bring in a management services organization so that you can get the maximum benefit out of the deductions and taxes that you've got, all above board with another group of advisors with that. But when you start to do it, you have to put it into a position where it's plug and play, because if you introduce somebody to all of it at once, it's overwhelming. So you start out, you spend a year with the trust, 2 years with the trust, underneath the LLCs with that, you get the flow through going, you get the cash going in the right direction, the CPA's happy. Then at the end of 2 years, you bring in somebody to do an MSO and get your insurances really going the right direction with that, because the MSO can construct an insurance diagram that works for everybody.
What is the MSO? Tell them that.
It's a management services organization, so that you can take the administration of each one of your businesses and put it into one place and maximize the disposition of income coming out of that. You can also put in your pension fund over there, which, let's face it, pension fund is one of the best asset protection instruments that you've got available for you. They're exempt in most states, and they're tax deferred, and they're tax deductible as you take them. So when you put that over into an MSO and you and your family become employees of that MSO, you're getting huge deduction for pension funds, pension monies. That's one of the things that you do. And then you get better deals on insurance. Plus your insurance advisor can come in. Your insurance advisor's got to look at the whole picture. So wait a minute, I can put something together with this. And you go back to whomever you're writing the insurance off of, you get the help from that. And you come in with a full-fledged insurance product, least expensive you can get for under the circumstances, for the best coverage that you can have, and all in the right places. So that's something that evolves over about 4 or 5 years.
Can you give me an example of two examples? One that came to you early and got protected properly, and then contrast that with someone who waited too long, if anything comes to mind.
Oh, yeah, I do. It's interesting. A lot of professionals, when they first start, get to where they got by being incredibly aggressive and not recognizing the downside, and thinking that they're basically 6'4" bulletproof. And there was a guy that I knew who'd gotten his MBA from a major university on the East Coast, and then ended up at a major brokerage house, and then ended up doing his own limited liability company offerings, and really hitting a lot of the right markets at the right time. But then he experienced, he's on the advisory board of some sort of Harvard endowment. It was a who's who. But when he started having the foundation shake a little bit in a financial downturn in 2008, he started moving money from one entity to another entity, which you can't do that.
Do that, right?
You cannot do that. That's the commingling. That's what we discussed earlier. That's the easiest thing to look at and go, what are you doing? These aren't separate entities. They're sharing money. And so he began moving money from one to another, and then he started lying to the agencies. And he ended up getting a $14 million judgment against him by the state of New York. And he had established an asset protection trust out in Nevada, but then he had been withdrawing money from that trust without the trustee giving him the okay to do it. Another real problem. So, they ported it over to Wyoming. They established something there, and we opened up all the books and records, and you need to come to a settlement on this. And he was just, by this time, he was in his 70s. And his attitude was that he's the victim. What do you do in that particular instance? You just, those people, and, we saved a couple million for him,
right?
Which, was enough for him to live on. Not to the extent that he was living in the previous 50 years, but, it was something. He wasn't broke living on the street.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Oh, so that's a tragic example, but the thing about that was it was so preventable. If at the beginning gone and gotten good advice, taking it, stealing money.
Yeah, I'm hoping that I'm excited to do this show because I'm hoping that you got to hear it your first time first, right? And this is what we're doing. So let me ask this: if a business owner, I'm gonna give you some physician, real estate investors, these type of people I work with, like owners, real estate investors, high income, upper middle to high income professionals. If they're listening to, they have done little or nothing to protect their wealth, what are the first 3 things they should do?
Oh, well, the first thing you do, you should call me and get a consultation. When we get off this call, I'm going to have my assistant reach out to you, link, And then on that link, they can get a free consultation for a half an hour.
Oh, awesome.
And if they come prepared, a half an hour is generally, if it runs over, it runs over. I don't really care. I keep track of that much time, So, and get a grasp of what I think, because I've been doing this for a while. I can tell you where you are and where you need to go pretty quickly most of the time.
Right.
So that'd be the first thing that you do. And the second thing you do is you get really good advisors and you shut up and take their advice.
Right. Well, that's a thought. Right. So
Here's a thought.
Give me one belief about asset protection that you wish people would stop believing.
Oh, that it's going to protect you from everything. The last thing it's not going to protect you from death. What it is going to do is it's going to protect your death.
Mm-hmm.
So, with a guy now who's been really successful, and I put together his whole family's a bunch of entrepreneurs. I put together trust for one of his kids, and she went to talk to kids into getting their own trust. And now she's dealing with her dad. Right, her dad's 75 years old, and he just doesn't have the time. I said, like that old Emily Dickinson song. I had no time for death, so he kindly stopped for me.
Okay, that's funny.
I said to him, at some point in time, you'll either make the time or time will be made for you.
That is for sure.
And it'll help you a lot if you make the time.
See, most people don't lose wealth because they fail to make it. They lose it because they fail to protect it, coordinate it, communicate before life tested the plan. That's what I'm hearing. And tell them, I'm going to put it in the show notes, but tell them how to, we'll have the link for the consultation, but if they want to follow you or read up on you or whatever, where should they go?
Our website is wyomingtrustattorney.com. It's got my picture on the front.
Mm-hmm.
And go there. There's a wealth of information there. And you can also book a consultation there. It's $375 for half an hour, or they can link 3 years and get one for free. So you'll either get a consultation with me or one of the people that I affiliate with, Yanni Anselm, who's also good. He does more of the offshore asset protection, which most people don't need, but he does that as well. But he's also an expert on asset protection in the United States as well. That's what you should do. Go through there and read it and familiarize yourself with the terms, because it's almost like anything when you first started in insurance, were you overwhelmed? Because the names, you're looking at these names, I've never heard these names before. I need to figure out what this means. And then now that you've used them for 20, 30 years, they're just second nature. You begin to speak in a completely different language as a result of that. So the idea here is to get yourself used to the nomenclature, and then have an initial consultation, look at the diagrams. Most men like diagrams. 98% of men communicate better with diagrams.
Right.
Women, I think, is still pretty high, but far less percentage. But
you said I'm thinking in diagrams. You said the umbrella. So now I'm picturing mine. Well, what does this look like? Could we draw it? So yeah. I know to your point exactly. I was that came to my mind, a visualization.
And that's it. So here's the ownership structure, and then how the cash flows. And here's when the cash flows. And I tell people, if you've got some months of working capital in an LLC, strip the rest of it out and put it someplace where somebody can't get a hold of it. Because I've never been in a lawsuit where a judge said you're insufficiently capitalized when you started down a rocky road. You had 6 months of working capital, free and clear, to dedicate to that business. And the judge was going to say, that's enough. So, moving those funds around when you start to become successful makes a big difference, because not every business stays successful.
Right. And
you see people throwing good money after bad. Ego gets involved.
I already see a part 2 to this, but
I'd love to come back on.
Yeah, like my head about to explode. We've been an hour, and I think we're just scratching the surface. So,
and that's where the Dutch comes in.
Yeah.
Stop doing that. If your father were here today, you'd look at you and say, "What? What are you doing?" People say, my dad would just. If he knew I was selling the business, he'd roll over in his grave. He wouldn't. He got into the business to pay for his family. He's rolling over the grave because you won't pay for your family. You're holding on to a business.
How about that?
You've seen that?
Yeah. This is a conversation. But that's why we call it financial literacy and just educating yourself, because I have a mentor, Nelson Nash, used to say, if you know what's going on, you know what to do. So you got to know what's going on. And it's a work in progress, because you can't know everything. You I have another minute to say you can't, but you got to spend some time on this stuff, and you're making it, and you got to play defense. I call it going up the mountain. You got to protect yourself while you're going up the mountain. You got to going down the mountain, and then you got to build a moat around what you're doing. And so this is I would classify this call as building your moat.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Nothing's ever as good or as bad as you think.
Right.
And that's why, you had your mentor who you could go talk to. That's a huge difference for people. And that mentor should be at least a generation, if not two older for you. For us at this point, it'd be one.
Right. Right. Exactly. Two's tough. They're like, who are you again now, Sonny?
I knew someone who looked like you. Well,
right.
Me.
That's hilarious. Mark, this has been, my mind is about to explode, but listen, I want to thank you and for the generous offer for the free consult. We're going to put in the show notes. I think you should take advantage of this. And I know we are. Right. So, and y'all go out there and Mark, I'm going to give you the last word and then we're going to close out. You got a last word of wisdom you want to share with them before you go?
Yeah. Be optimistic, plan for the worst, but the best.
There we go. So we're going to end with that. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Practical Wealth Show. You all know somebody that needs to hear this. So I want you to subscribe. I want you to forward it to them. If they use the link, they'll get a consult also. And go out there and make it a great day, everybody.
Excellent. Yeah. All right. Curtis, thank you.
You're welcome. All right.